Welcome to the health section of Life's About Living. You know, most Americans are concerned about the COVID vaccine, and they're asking themselves the question, should I take the COVID vaccine? And here is my take on that as a physician. Yesterday I received the Moderna COVID vaccine, and I haven't had any complications. And we're hearing a lot of myths in the media that I want to dispel. And we have to realize that any kind of treatment that we take, whether it's surgery, whether it's a medicine, whether it's the COVID vaccine, there are risks and benefits. And so we have to weigh those risks and benefits depending upon the risks. And there are some people that have very low risk of ever getting really sick with the COVID vaccine. We know once again that 90% of the population will get the COVID vaccine and do fine and not ever have to be hospitalized. And so if you're less than the age of 50 and you don't have a lot of medical diseases, you probably shouldn't even be thinking about getting the COVID vaccine anyway. Now, however, if you're in that high risk category, and I know most of you have heard those risks, if you're morbidly obese, if you have hypertension, if you have diabetes or other chronic medical problems, if you're immunosuppressed, or maybe have a rheumatologic disease, you might be at a higher risk for having really severe complications from COVID. And so you should consider the vaccine. We know that half of the deaths of COVID have been in patients about 75 to 90 years. And so most people in that age group probably need to get a COVID vaccine. So you have to weigh the risk and you have to look at the benefits. And so if you have a very low risk for dying from COVID, then you probably shouldn't take the vaccine. But if, on the other hand, if you're in that high risk category, you ought to take the vaccine. Now, some of the risks of the vaccine have been noted, and they are neurologic problems. We've seen several cases of Bell's palsy, which is a facial nerve paralysis. We've also seen several seizures, but most of the people who get the vaccine just have flu-like symptoms. I mean, like for example, I'm having a little pain in my arm, maybe a low-grade fever. But those are the main complications. Probably 99% of patients who get the vaccine will just have a low-grade fever and maybe just some general flu-like symptoms. That's a sign that your body is beginning to respond to the foreign material, and that's good news. One of the main objections and one of the main conspiracy theories out there is that one of the things that's injected into your body is this colloid, which incorporates into your body. And the elements, the aluminum and maybe some of the metals in this injected material become something which they can trace you with a 5G network. I know of no science that supports that. I think something that's even probably more probable is the cell phone that you're using is much more probable to be traced. In fact, they're doing that now. And so if you're really concerned about that, I would just stop using your media and turn off your cell phone. Now, I've got another video which describes the second type of concern, and that's that the mRNA of the vaccine is incorporated into your human genome. And I want you to watch this video, and it will explain to you a little bit more about this myth and help you understand why this is almost virtually impossible for the mRNA to be incorporated into your human DNA. We've been hearing a lot of myths about the COVID vaccine and the fact that it can incorporate inside the human genome, cause a chimera type phenomenon or maybe infertility. And what I want to do today is I want to dispel some of those myths that we're hearing in the media about the COVID vaccine and hopefully give you an understanding of just some basic cell biology. I'm Dr. Page, the best guy to see on the worst day of your life. I'm not an immunologist, I'm a surgeon, but I also graduated with a degree in cell biology from college. So I'm not a rocket scientist in any way, but I want to explain this to you in a way that you can understand. I want you to imagine this being a cell in your body. And inside the cell, right in the middle, is something that we call the nucleus. Inside the nucleus of the cell is where your DNA, your human genome, all of your genetic material is found. And it looks kind of like a ladder. It's all scrunched up together. But what the DNA does in the nucleus is the DNA is the genetic code And it makes these messages called messenger RNA. And so the DNA kind of unfolds, it kind of unzips, and then the DNA becomes an RNA. And what happens to this RNA out in the cytoplasm, outside of the nucleus, is the RNA begins this process called translation. Now, the process of making DNA to RNA is what we call transcription. And that's like when you would transcribe something. You don't really change the message. You just write it down, maybe from your computer to a piece of paper. That would be like a transcription. But what happens after RNA is made by the DNA is we have this process called translation, where it's translated into a protein, something very different. And we call that translation. Okay? And what happens here is that RNA in the cytoplasm outside of the nucleus changes that message into protein. Now, what's interesting about the COVID vaccine is the COVID vaccine is actually an mRNA. It's actually that message that would make a virus. So typically the way vaccines have worked in the past is a vaccine is a protein that we make and we inject in the body, and then your body recognizes it as a foreign material. What scientists have done is they've taken a step back and they've made the precursor to the protein. They've actually made the message, the mRNA, which comes inside your cells, and then your body converts that message into the protein. And then, of course, your body recognizes that as a foreign material, and you develop this immunologic reaction. You develop an immune response. And so that's the whole concept. And so it's a lipid. It has a lipid membrane, and it looks kind of like a half ladder. It's this genetic code that comes into the cell. Now the misunderstanding here is that somehow people think that this mRNA can somehow get inside the nucleus and can become incorporate into the human genome. And there's really not a lot of science behind that. In fact, it would be a rare exception, a 1 in a million exception for that to happen. And if it did happen, it probably wouldn't make a difference anyway. So it would be the exception for that to happen. And so understand the basic science behind this will help you understand that really this myth that somehow we have this conspiracy where they're trying to change our human genome, or they're trying to put something in our body that can be tracked, really doesn't have a lot of scientific basis behind it. Basically, all this is a precursor message that your body will convert into protein, and then very quickly it will be digested and it'll be forgotten. And so that's what the COVID vaccine does. It does not incorporate into the human genome. It does not cause infertility. It does not cause all of those things. I mean, one of the reasons why they've been able to come out with this vaccine so much faster is because they didn't actually have to make the protein. They just made the precursor to the protein, lets your body do all the work. I'm Dr. Page, the best guy to see on the worst day of your life, and I hope this answered some of your questions about the COVID vaccine. I got my COVID vaccine. I haven't had a seizure, a neurologic reaction, or anything. And I think you would be wise to consider that, especially